Good morning, friends.
Good morning.
I hope you'll forgive, I left my jacket at the back of the room. It's a little stuffy in here, so we're gonna go with just the shirt. So, Mitch did a great job of talking about the future. I want to talk just a little bit about recent history. And for those in the room that have been part of our kind of ongoing monthly Zoom meetings, some of this, I'm going to apologize, is going to be review, but for those that haven't, this is good information for you to kind of take home with you. We'll talk about Ohio's budget season, which just came to an end. I know the representative is just delighted that that is behind us. But it's 6 months of very intense legislative activity. We look at 4 different total budgets. 2 of them we'll talk about today, the transportation and the operating budget. Again, I'm John Esterly. I'm the executive director here. Wear many hats in my life, but almost exclusively in the transportation and labor policy space. So you'll hear me say just about the same thing depending on, or in spite of what hat I happen to be wearing that day. So the big budgets that we'll talk about today, again, the transportation and operating budgets. These collectively appropriate almost $75 billion in state revenue across the state. Transportation is almost exclusively gas tax dollars, so think roads, bridges, tunnels, things along that. And then operating budget is everything else. This budget cycle, the transportation budget was House Bill 54, and the operating budget was House Bill 96. As we've talked through this, we've seen a lot of dates, but the 2 that are important right now, the transportation budget passed in the middle of March without a conference committee, and then the operating budget passed just a couple of weeks ago on June 25th. A little bit different this year in terms of the makeup of our subcommittee structure. The House has traditionally heard testimony in finance subcommittees. That was not the case this General Assembly. We just heard them in the kind of relevant standing committees. And we heard testimony in a total of 13 other committees other than the Finance Committee. For those that really want to nerd out on this, I would recommend you going to lsc.ohio.gov. They do have a Budget Central tab that gets you all of the information that you would ever want, and probably some that you don't, on all of these things.
It's really exciting.
It really is. It's really cool.
Good stuff.
Tens of thousands of pages of stuff. So a little bit about the process. So the first step, the budgets are introduced. Budgets start on the House side of our bicameral legislature. We hear testimony early on in the Finance Committee and then in all of those relevant standing committees. We then adopt a substitute bill. So we make so many changes to the budget throughout the process, it just doesn't make sense to amend it one amendment at a time. We go through and we basically redraft a new bill that reflects all of the amendments that the committee has approved, and we introduce this substitute bill. Again, this is done on the House side in the Finance Committee, and then we pass it out of committee, out of the House, and it goes over to the Senate. Then the process starts over. We essentially do the same thing again on the Senate side. We'll hear testimony in the upper chamber, again in that Finance Committee, and then the relevant standing committees. Senators make changes based on their priorities. There are different priorities in the 2 chambers of our legislature, so you'll see kind of 2 different versions of the bill. Again, the Senate adopts a substitute bill because we're again amending it so much it doesn't make sense to entertain those amendments one at a time. And then it will pass the Senate committee and then again Senate floor. Then we do this thing called conference committee, where we have the chair, vice chair, and ranking member of the appropriate committee in both chambers meet, and they kind of negotiate between the 2 iterations of the bill. So the bill that the House passed and the bill that the Senate passed, and they come up with a compromise in the middle. Now, in very unusual history, in fact, I'm unaware of any other time this has happened. Anybody can throw out if they have seen it. The transportation budget passed without conference. So the Senate passed their iteration of the bill, and then the House approved all of the changes that have been made. So there was really no conflict between the 2 chambers on that. That did not happen in the operating budget. We did have the more traditional conference committee with the operating budget, and then passed kind of a hybrid version of the 2. we're missing some slides. So I'm gonna wing it a little bit here. We'll talk a little bit about what was included in the bill, in the operating budget and in the transportation budget, and then talk a little bit more about kind of the good news about where we stand in Ohio. So for those that are aware, and Mitch mentioned it in his comments, we did have a Advocacy Day on March the 5th. Thank you so much. There are many people in this room that were a part of that Advocacy Day, whether in the planning process or whether coming to the State House, making the trip into Central Ohio to be a part of that. Again, we met with over half of the elected officials in the State House. We also had a reception where we were able to talk with about 30 or 40 more. So all in all, we met with almost 3/4 of the elected officials in Ohio State House, which is just an incredible amount of people to get kind of the same message to in a single day. That was immediately prior to the transportation budget being passed, so we were able to talk a lot about our priorities, which one of our biggest priorities was rejoining the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, or MIPRC. The House, thank you very much, was able to include that in their version of the transportation budget. The Senate removed it. There was some concerns about the way that it would be funded. Again, that transportation budget is almost exclusively gas tax dollars, and they wanted the MIPRC funding to go into the operating budget, so that's what we did. Again, the House, thank you very much, included MIPRC in their House-passed version of the operating budget. The Senate removed it again. Their concerns, it sounds like there are a few, but one of them is that it just didn't get a whole lot of scrutiny throughout the course of the process. They'd like it introduced as a standalone bill, so that's exactly what we're going to do. So a little preview of coming attractions. Some of the other things that were included in that operating budget, we had a minor change to the makeup of the Rail Development Commission. Unfortunately, we lost the commissioner that's specifically designated to represent the interests of passenger rail. We do, however, have a total of 3 members of that Rail Development Commission that represent the general public. Our goal, and I'm saying this to those of you in the room, our goal is to try and find somebody in that general public realm that can represent the interests of passenger rail, even though they're not representing the interests of passenger rail. So we'll probably talk more about that this summer. We've got some good candidates to bring on board there that I think will represent the interests in a very nonpartisan manner and then really continue to move the needle forward. So that might be kind of the bad news. We had some changes to the Rail Development Commission that might look like passenger rail is no longer a priority. We didn't get our funding for MIPRC, which was kind of a bummer because I think everybody in this room did a ton of work, and we're very, very thankful for all the advocacy that you did, whether it be coming to Columbus and taking those meetings at the State House, or when we activated you immediately prior to the 2 budgets, the phone calls and emails that you sent. Thank you again so much. But now for the good news. I know that's a lot, but the good news is nothing that happened in the budget process is going to jeopardize us moving from step 1 to step 2 of the corridor ID process. ORDC still has their funding intact. We have a commitment from them that they are going to still be able to fund the 2 state-sponsored routes, so 3CD, Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit, going into step 2. MIPRC feels very confident that their coalition of partners is going to be able to fund their portion of step 2. So again, although we may have had a little bit of wind knocked out of our sails in terms of the things that were and were not included in the state transportation and operating budget, in the grand scheme of things, with our goal, which is a more connected Ohio, we're still, as I like to say, along the most optimistic timeline. We are still, there's nothing that has changed the fact that we could have operating passenger rail service in Ohio in the very, very early 2030s. So with that, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, who just joined us, had just enough time to sit down and check his messages. So perfect timing. I'd love to have you all give a warm welcome and a good round of applause to Jason Ortner, our dear friend from the state of North Carolina, who we have already talked about today. And we'd love to hear some remarks from you about what you folks have done in what I feel to be a very good comparative state to ours here. Thank you so much, and welcome.